Ireland, the country with the highest density of famous musicians per capita in the entire world. Ireland is a country with less than 5 million inhabitants. Even Boston has a larger population. But as small as the population may be, Ireland is the cradle of well-known music like Enya, the Cranberries, and of course Bono from U2. But there is another thing that makes Ireland famous as well, and that's that it's the second wealthiest country in the Eurozone. Further, Irish people have more money than the British or even the Swiss. And this is surprising, given that just 30 years ago, Ireland was as poor as Greece. Yep, you heard that right. Back then, 1 in every 5 Irish university students were emigrating to other countries. Today, there are more people with Irish blood living in the US or Australia than there are in Ireland itself. Nonetheless, now this country is home to some of the world's leading technological companies. Firms like Apple or Google have their tax headquarters there, and many of you might be thinking now that that's simply because of the low taxes there, right? Now, of course, it is absolutely true that Ireland does offer good fiscal conditions for companies, but other countries like the Republic of Liberia or the Seychelles also offer pretty low corporate taxes, and they're not even half as rich as Ireland. So the big question here is, what have they done to grow so fast? How is it that even after the financial crisis, Ireland remains wealthier than Switzerland? Today, we're going to answer this question, but first, as usual, we're going to take a look at the history.
The poorest of the wealthiest.
Ireland was born in 1922, but before that, the whole island was part of the British Crown. And the relationship, well, it wasn't exactly great. For the English politicians, Ireland was a land of Catholic peasants who were unwilling to work and devoted to having lots and lots of children. This explains why, after they got their independence, the new Republic of Ireland cut all of their ties with London. Well, actually, it wasn't just London. They closed off their relationships with the rest of the world as well. Even during World War II, they were the only English-speaking country that kept neutral. But not only that, the different Irish governments closed their gates to international trade. They even put a ban on foreigners owning or investing in local companies. So now the question is, what was the outcome of all of these policies? Well, the answer to that would be a brutal economic crisis.
Fortunately enough, because Irish people spoke English, they could easily move to the United States. We're not talking about adventurers here. In just a few decades, the Irish population reduced by half. And of course, the national industry never grew as it was expected to. Think about it. In such a small country, it is impossible to find the tools and resources needed to build factories and machines. There just isn't enough industry. They needed to import them. But because the government put so many fares and barriers to foreign trade, it was pretty hard to get the material needed to start a new company.
This was why in 1957 the government of Sean Thomas O'Kelly made Ireland turn 180 on their trade policy. This is how they went from not buying anything to opening their gates to the entire world. Right after that, they signed a free trade agreement with the UK, and a decade later, they would enter the European Community, which later came to be called the European Union. But hold on just a minute, my dear libertarians who might be watching this video, just hold back your enthusiasm for a wee moment, because this openness to free trade was not exactly as good as expected.
Think about it. For decades, Ireland was closed for business. They had nationalized many of their companies. When a company knows that they have no rivals and their market share is guaranteed by the government, they have very little reason to improve. This explains, for instance, why in 1980, people in the city of Cork, which is in the southern part of Ireland, had so many electricity breakdowns and brownouts. Their wiring network hadn't been replaced for decades. The same happened in many other industries.
And now, all of a sudden, the Irish economy allowed people to buy goods abroad. New products, more competitive products, they appeared in the market. So now you're probably wondering, what happened to those local producers? Well, unsurprisingly, they disappeared. And with them, thousands of people just lost their jobs. In 1987, Ireland reached an unemployment rate of 17%. So once again, the Irish youth started packing up and moving abroad. Now, if you've been following visual politics for some time, you'll probably know that immigration isn't really much of a problem for a country. Can you guess what the real issue is? Well, actually, it's exactly the opposite: migration. What you need to consider is who was leaving Ireland. Well, it was the university students, and it was those people with higher skills. This caused what is known as a brain drain. Oh, but believe me, there's more than this. In order to attract multinational corporations, the government lowered taxes. And of course, this strategy worked out well. Firms like Intel, Apple, Microsoft, they chose Ireland as the place for their European headquarters. So now you might be wondering, what's the problem with this? This sounds great. Well, they essentially just opened up a tiny office with an accountant. This means that their contribution to the country's wealth was actually fairly poor. If this was not enough, the same government that put the red carpet out to companies was also raising income tax on its citizens. Some people ended up paying 60% in tax from their salaries. And if this was not enough, Irish legislation did not make it easy to hire people. So now consider the situation. Jobs are disappearing, local companies are going bankrupt, government spending is on the rise, and thousands of Irish people are just leaving the country. In 1988, The Economist magazine published this article.
Poorest of the rich. Poor Ireland behaved as though it was rich. Now it must pay the price.
All right. So that's the bad stuff covered. Now, how did they step out of this scenario? Well, let me tell you a story.
The Celtic Tiger roars.
It was the year 1987, and Charles Haughey had won the elections in Ireland. He found a country on the edge of collapse, and he realized something. You can't open your economic system without first modernizing it. Of course, companies like Oracle or HP were happy to be in Ireland and pay less taxes than they were paying in the US, but were they willing to open a research center or a factory that would employ 1,000 people? The answer was no. And why? Well, first they would have to deal with the labor laws, which were a bureaucratic nightmare. But not only that, remember what we said about the 60% income tax? This means that no matter how high the salaries for the worker were, a fairly large chunk of that is still going to the government. In other words, highly skilled professionals would rather just move to the United States. So the first policy implemented by Haughey was to deal with the trade unions and the companies. Salaries would grow at the same rate as the economy would. On the other hand, he lowered income taxes. This way, workers ended up making more money even if the wages were the same. And this soon started generating results.
Hewlett-Packard Leixlip plant is to employ 2,000 people by the year 2000.
In a short amount of time, all of those multinational companies that had opened their fiscal headquarters on Irish soil started owning their own factories and offices. Meanwhile, unemployment was going down, wages were on the rise, and even the government collected more money. But not only that. This deal with the unions and bureaucratic simplification helped create all new companies. Have you ever flown with Ryanair, bought a t-shirt at Primark, drunk a Guinness? Well, all of these companies expanded internationally during those years. This explains why the Irish economy grew as much as the Chinese economy during the 1990s. Suddenly, hairdressers in Dublin would offer champagne to their customers. Some people even flew to New York to do shopping on the weekends. These were the years of the Celtic Tiger, and at that point, The Economist decided to dedicate another article to the country.
A decade ago, Irish incomes were less than 2/3 of British incomes. Last year, by one measure, they had surpassed British incomes.
But hold on just a moment, because not everything is so perfect. Of course, during those 15 years, salaries doubled, but that optimism drove banks to offer mortgages to nearly everyone and encouraged ridiculous spending. In those years, there were even companies that rented helicopters for children to have their first communion in the air. And this led to a financial crisis that we are going to cover in another video. If you don't want to miss that video, please do not forget to subscribe to this channel. Meanwhile, you might want to watch another video where we explain why London is actually growing faster than New York City. You can click here to see it. So now the question is, do you think that the Irish model could help other countries like Greece or perhaps India? Do you think poor countries could benefit from attracting foreign investment? You can leave your answer for us in the comments below. We would love to read it. And if you did like this video, please do give us a thumbs up below. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.
And if you want to learn more about politics and hear even more of my lovely voice, you can join us at Reconsider Media. We have a podcast at reconsidermedia.com/podcast. See you there.